Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Brianna.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
So good. Thanks for coming down and sitting with me.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about it's so great. We're going to talk about your solo, originally called Me, Mine, More, but for the performance that you did at Ryerson's Choreographic Works this year, you called it One Glimpse Inside.
Yeah, the original, the full length is Me, Mine, More, and then just the short edit I called One Glimpse Inside, as in like a literal one glimpse inside of the overall, or of the full-length work.
Is it longer than 5 minutes?
Yeah,
okay.
The original, or the full-length work, I should say, is about 10 minutes, maybe 10 and a half minutes. Yeah.
So how did you cut part of it out? Like, I imagine you'd want to keep all of it in.
Well, I sort of just chose parts that I thought highlighted the more like landmark moments, like highlighted the theme a little bit more. And I also worked with people in the studio and showed them the full-length version and then said, like, what parts really stand out to you. Gotcha. And then they would say this part, and then I would sort of compose those parts together. But I definitely didn't like shorten any of the moments. So if something took a minute to do, I would have still taken a minute in the edited version.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was very, like, prevalent or visible because you took such, like, a patient quality with it. I was only able to see it from the side, which is a little bit different, but from backstage, I just immediately, like, dropped into the state of almost, like, tranquility that you were giving.
Yeah. That's a really nice observation.
Yeah.
Because that's something I was conscious of. Because I want to work on creating something that transforms time and space. So my way of doing that is kind of like testing the boundaries of how long something can take or how quickly something can happen. Especially in the setting of choreographic works.
Right.
I wanted to impose this structure that things happen really slowly in order to give a contrast of what happened in the show before and what happens after, because I was like bookended by two pieces that were quite dynamic in movement. So I thought it was like a privilege to really like take that time and insert that patience in the structure of the show.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
What a great way to, like, also for the audience to be able to, again, like, drop into it. Like, it was, like, right away, as soon as you started, I just was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Whew, I can breathe.
Oh, that's
and
so
I
nice.
Can, like, really just take in what you wanted to say.
Yeah, it's, like, such a privilege to be on stage and to perform in front of an audience. So I feel like when I have that moment, I'm like, I want to have this moment, you know, and, like, take my time and say what I want to say and not rush from one idea to the next. Yes. You know, just really like indulge and like people are watching me. I get to like take my time and do my thing.
I totally agree. It's the best feeling.
Yeah, and with gratitude and all of that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the many versions of this solo.
Yeah.
So it started in Berlin, right?
Yeah, it started last July. It would have been July 2018. I got a residency at a studio called Lake Studios Berlin, and I traveled to Europe for the first time all by myself to Berlin.
So cool.
And I lived at a studio for a month by myself working on this solo, which was a very challenging experience because it was actually the first time that I had worked by myself in a studio by myself in a studio, and then also for that long on one project.
Right.
So it was like a residency of firsts, you know, like my first residency, my first full-length solo, or I wouldn't say full-length, but the first solo that I was creating longer than 3 minutes, and also the first time spending a month day-to-day working on this one thing.
Wow.
And then from there, I came back to Toronto, and in December, like kind of overlapping December to January, I got a second residency at Dancemakers over the holidays. And that was a time of just like revisiting this work and like kind of reassessing what the solo was doing and what else I wanted it to say. So during that time, I collaborated with somebody to create the music. So the music's an original soundtrack.
Who is it?
His name's Jacopo Biffi. He's an Italian-based artist who I met during my time in Berlin. Okay. And we didn't actually begin the conversation about music until I got into the studio at Dancemakers, and I was like, I love what you do. I want you to make something for this. And it was also great because he had seen the work in Berlin.
So was there music in Berlin, or was it just...
There was, but it was like, I didn't have the rights to it. It was just me trying many different pieces and different, like creating just different atmospheres with music, and nothing really stood out to me in ways that I was like, I want this to be the song. Yeah, so when I got to Dancemakers, it was really about getting music together. Sort of like as a side note, during my time at Dancemakers, I played with contact microphones, and like I tried recording the sounds of my movement against the floor, and that like did not work at all how I wanted it to work.
I feel like I've never heard of that. So as you move, the like sound is picked up.
Yeah, well, what I thought would happen was I'd put a contact microphone on the floor, and it would essentially pick up the sounds of my movements. Okay. And that I could turn that into a score of music. Right. But what ended up happening is it would just pick up certain, like, if I hit the floor with a stomp. And as you said, like, the solo is quite delicate. Yes, so nothing was picked up.
Still a cool idea, though.
Like, yeah, I know. Definitely an idea I want to play with.
And was that, like, essentially you were wanting to put that as the background track?
Yeah, like I wanted to make that the music in some way.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was sort of a like wild idea because I have no experience with composing music for one, or with like editing raw sounds. Right, yeah. Or even with using contact microphones. So that was really just me playing. Cool. Yeah, so then after the residency at Dancemakers, I performed the solo at Eris Corpor's event called Prospects, which is an evening of dance and discussion in Burlington, Ontario. So it's removed from the city, which was really nice. I got to perform and then have a discussion with the audience about the performance. Okay. And I learned a lot from talking with the audience, and they were able to write on cue cards with feedback, and I could ask questions and they could respond on the cue cards. And then choreo happened, and I did a little excerpt or edition of the solo. And coming next, which is really exciting,
the fourth version,
I'll be traveling to Edmonton to perform at Next Fest, which is a dance festival created by Good Women Dance Collective. And I'm really grateful to be able to travel to Edmonton. I've never been to Alberta. So I'm really excited to go to the province and have a new community, like, of people and meet new faces. Yeah, so I guess as there, I don't know.
You don't know, yeah. As you go through each of these multiple versions, the audience changes, the location changes, the ambiance changes. Yeah. And actually, going back to the one you did in January, I'm interested to hear about, like, you had cue cards, you said. So they wouldn't necessarily be asking you the questions, like, face-to-face? You would just read them and then respond? Or
yeah, so I performed, and then right after the performance, I was able to prepare a few questions in advance. So then after the performance, I would ask the audience questions. Like, for example, one of the questions were, what are the first thing you notice about someone, right? Because the solo deals with this idea of social perception and how we perceive each other. So I asked the audience, what are some of the first things that you notice of others? And they were able to jot down, and then we also had a verbal discussion. People could respond in that moment. And then I, at the end of the performance, collected the cue cards and, take them away from that and have all that information.
So you can, like, archive this
Mm-hmm.
the audience's comments, suggestions.
Yeah.
And then that like influences your next performance.
Exactly. Yeah. So
cool.
like next time I go to work on the solo, I'll be able to like have real information, like real feedback on these cue cards, not just from my memory,
Dope.
but like people's words, people's handwriting, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And such a unique thing, like such a great idea that Eris Corpora does. Yeah. Really
awesome.
unique.
So social perception. So
yeah,
as you
big term.
yes, big one. I mean, I'm trying to now think back as I watch the solo moments where that would be prevalent. I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact that you stay so much to the back of the stage.
Yeah.
Has a sort of. Does it create a barrier, do you find, between you and the audience, or are you able to sort of let them see you fully?
Yeah, I mean, I was not necessarily conscious of that as like a decision.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't necessarily a decision that I made.
Oh, okay.
But with that, there's definitely, like I definitely did that because I don't want to be in the face of the audience, you know? Like I don't want it, I want you to see everything.
And with choreo, it's so close.
Yeah, I want the audience to see all of me and the space.
Okay.
So when I'm like standing right in front of one person, like the sight lines, you know, just like that changes the perception of how they're seeing me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but like in terms of social perception as a theme, I wouldn't necessarily say that my solo is trying to portray that.
Okay.
But it's more a jumping off point. Like this is the theory that I'm interested in, and through all the work that I've done around that theme, this is where the solo has landed. Rather than I am trying to tell you about social perception through this solo.
Okay.
So I feel like that's a hard task.
Yes, yeah.
And
especially, I guess, through
a solo.
A solo and also a movement language that doesn't have necessarily word communication, I guess.
Yeah.
Because
exactly.
If you think about social perception in our day-to-day lives, it's usually when we're talking to someone.
Yeah.
You know, small talk or
or like how
discussion.
I view you in this moment based
even
on what you're wearing or your body language.
Right.
But when I'm on a stage in a costume that I've put thought into, like I've composed all these elements together, you're seeing me in a very different light. And I'm doing movements that I've worked like so long on, like composing these movements, structuring these ideas. So your perception of me in that social encounter, we can call that, like air quotes, is very different than it would be on a very average day, right? So the solo is not necessarily trying to say like this is how people encounter me on a social realm, but these are my feelings associated with it, or this is like my interpretation of how that is encountered in my body.
Okay.
Yeah.
That yes, I think that
if
makes
that
sense.
makes any sense. That's just a bunch of words in my head.
No, I think that's especially you say that it's something that you're in your daily life you're thinking about. I think a lot of times when people create a piece of work, they feel like they have to sort of be a dancer. They can't be a human.
Right.
And at least for me, I personally have been trying to find a bridge between the two.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important to also be an artist and to be,
I agree,
the dancer that you've been since you were 3 years old or whatever. But you go through moments in your life, not in your dance life, but in your human life, that can inspire performance.
Right.
And then maybe as an audience, you are connecting to them in a more human way, rather than I'm the dancer, you're the audience.
Yeah, and then there's like this division.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely found that in your show. Like it was human.
Yeah, I think I went for that. I tried for that. To make it accessible too, especially if I'm trying to perform this with many different audiences and for many different people. Like how can I create something that's not necessarily understood by every person, because that's a very, very challenging task. But how can I create something that's accessible or relatable for many different people?
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm excited to see. Oh, I can't come to Edmonton, but I'm excited to see where it goes.
Edmonton.
Yeah.
Yeah, me
I
as
wish
well.
I could. Yeah. Hopefully it'll take off even more. Because I think
I hope so.
It's really great that you've taken it this far. Great. Well, thank you for coming to chat with me.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure. It went so fast.
I know. Thanks.
Awesome.